Welcome to this explainer. We're so often taught about the relentless, inevitable march of the British Empire. But today we are going to explore a deeply buried chapter of history that completely flips that narrative on its head. Picture this. It's the late 17th century, and the East India Company makes the frankly baffling decision to pick a fight with the wealthiest, most powerful empire on the face of the earth. Let's dive right into this saga of corporate greed, cinematic heroism, and, well, ultimate humiliation.
So, what exactly happens when a greedy merchant company declares war on the greatest empire on Earth? Okay, let's dive into this. It's 1686. You have the English East India Company, which is essentially just a group of really ambitious merchants, and they are getting incredibly frustrated with their trade terms in India. On the other side, you have the Mughal Empire, an absolute behemoth of military and economic supremacy run by Emperor Aurangzeb. When these two collide, the result is a monumental miscalculation. The sources tell us that the company executives sitting in their cozy London boardrooms genuinely believed a war of intimidation would actually force the Mughal emperor to lower their taxes.
Section 1. The company's arrogant gambits.
To understand how this whole thing sparked, we really have to look at the Bengal province. The Mughal governor there had just raised taxes on the East India Company to 3.5% and tightened up control over their trade. Well, the company's governor back in London, a guy named Sir Josiah Child, absolutely scoffed at the might of Emperor Aurangzeb. When he was warned about the sheer danger of this, Child uttered this incredibly pompous theatrical line. He threatened to, quote, blow him away from the wind of his bum. I mean, wow. He genuinely truly believed that just a few English warships could topple the sovereign of the entire subcontinent. Just to put this corporate delusion into perspective, consider the sheer statistical mismatch of Child's gamble. You have the East India Company's forces, consisting of a few thousand local mercenaries and just a handful of warships. Pitted against them is the Mughal Empire. We are talking about a 500,000-strong professional army. Plus, they were supported by 400,000 conscripts, 50,000 heavy cavalry, and 30,000 literal war elephants. This wasn't even a David versus Goliath scenario. It was more like a flea threatening a charging rhinoceros.
And get this, out of that already tiny company force, they only had 150 actual British infantry stationed at their primary fort in Bombay. 150, relying on that handful of guys to wage war against a highly advanced, gunpowder-equipped empire of millions. I mean, it was, simply put, a suicide mission. But, unfazed by reality, the company launched its grand invasion anyway. They sent Admiral Nicholson with 12 warships and 600 men, with strict instructions to capture the heavily fortified port of Chittagong. But, as usually happens when you tempt fate, a massive storm scattered the fleet. They completely missed Chittagong and drifted up the Hooghly River in Bengal instead. And the actual spark that ignited this massive war? It wasn't some grand diplomatic breakdown. Nope. 3 English soldiers on shore leave got into a drunken brawl with Mughal officials in a local marketplace and got severely beaten up. In retaliation, the English fleet just started bombarding the town, burning down 500 houses. The First Anglo-Mughal War literally, officially began over a street fight.
Section 2. Rise of the Tiger.
So, as the English arrogantly fortified their positions along the Hooghly River, dragging up cannons and trying to blockade trade, they totally underestimated the local response. Enter Subadar Arif Khan, famously known as the Tiger of Hooghly. Picture this. The monsoon rains are just lashing the riverbanks. Arif Khan, who is this highly decorated, fiercely loyal Mughal officer, is just watching them from the shadows. He's got brilliant tactical vision, and he knows he can't just march his men straight into a barrage of heavy naval cannons. So he decides to use the river itself against them.
Section 3. The Night of Fire.
The British, feeling super secure behind all those heavy guns, had basically just settled in for the night. But Arif Khan had quietly gathered this incredible mixed force of Mughal archers, cavalry, and local river mariners to deliver a really brutal wake-up call. The timeline of this raid is just straight out of a movie. At nightfall, under a heavy downpour, small boats slide through the water silently, completely bypassing the massive warships. Then, right at midnight, a fearless local boat captain named Amina navigates a specialized fire ship directly into an East India Company's supply vessel. The impact is catastrophic. Flames just roar into the night sky, and Mughal forces swarm the British positions in the total panic that follows.
Amidst all that burning wreckage, the British commander, Captain Harrington, attempts a desperate retreat, but the Tiger of Hooghly is waiting for him. Arif Khan actually tackles the English captain right to the muddy ground. Looking down at the defeated invader, he delivers this chilling, resolute message. This river belongs to Hindustan. And by early morning, the Mughal flag is raised over Hooghly once again, and the British are sent scrambling.
Section 4. Betrayal and the Counterstrike. While that fighting was raging, a local landowner named Ratan Sen actually attempted to betray the Mughal forces for British gold. Luckily, Arif Khan intercepted the plot incredibly quickly and threw the traitor in chains. But of course, news of this British aggression and the attempted gold-fueled treachery finally reached the absolute highest echelons of power. Emperor Aurangzeb, who had previously been occupied with other wars, suddenly turned his full, terrifying gaze toward the company. Enraged by their piracy and the bombardment of his towns, his orders were absolutely unequivocal. Drive them into the sea. The full, terrifying weight of the Mughal military machine powered up.
The crucial point here is that the British offensive just completely collapsed. The English commander in Bengal, Job Charnock, was forced into this desperate, panicked retreat. Relentlessly chased by the Mughal army under heavy pressure, he had to pull his men back to this low, deadly, grass-covered swamp at the mouth of the river called Injali. It was an absolute nightmare. A swamp with practically no fresh water. The hunter had quite literally become the hunted, just trapped in the mud. Within just 3 months, half of all the English troops perished from tropical diseases and famine.
Section 5. The Siege of Bombay.
Now, while Bengal was an utter disaster, the true climax of this war happened on the western coast, and it was triggered by one final, spectacularly foolish move by the company. In January 1689, company ships decided to ambush an unarmed Mughal grain convoy, but this wasn't just any convoy. It was carrying essential rations to Emperor Aurangzeb's massive field armies in the Deccan Plateau. Look, you can skirmish in Bengal, but you absolutely do not cut off the vital food supply to the emperor's primary war effort. That was the last straw. Aurangzeb immediately ordered the confiscation of all British property in India.
Aurangzeb dispatched his brilliant African-descended naval commander, Admiral Sidi Yaqub, who led the formidable Janjira fleet. Yaqub didn't mess around. He landed a massive force of 14,000 Mughal troops right on the shores north of Bombay. He completely overran the town of Swari in a matter of hours, dragged heavy artillery right up Dongri Hill, and just mercilessly bombarded Bombay Fort. Then he instituted a total naval blockade. This caused a devastating year-long famine where 90% of the city's population, along with almost the entire British garrison, either perished or deserted. It completely broke the British resolve.
Section 6. The Ultimate Humiliation.
Broken, starving, and pretty much on the brink of complete annihilation, the East India Company finally threw in the towel. And the terms of the surrender, utterly humbling. Remember that pompous Sir Josiah Child? Well, company envoys were forced to travel to Aurangzeb's camp and literally prostrate themselves, face down in the dirt, begging for their lives. On top of that, they had to pay a massive imperial fine of 150,000 rupees, which is the equivalent of millions of dollars today. And, the kicker, they had to formally promise on paper to behave better in the future. The mighty, arrogant East India Company reduced to groveling subjects.
Yet chances are you have never even heard of this war. Why is that? Well, it boils down to historical erasure. As the British eventually expanded and established their empire decades later, Victorian historians actively, purposefully swept Josiah Child's catastrophic blunder right under the rug to protect their imperial pride. It was a deeply embarrassing corporate disaster, a massive blot on the illusion of British invincibility. They really didn't want the world to remember that their grand empire in India actually began with them begging for forgiveness in the mud.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating historical what-if. Emperor Aurangzeb had the British completely at his mercy. If he had chosen to, he could have entirely expelled the East India Company in 1690. But, valuing the silver they brought in trade, he pardoned them. If he hadn't shown that mercy, would the British Empire in India have ever existed at all? It's crazy to think that global history hung by a single thread of Mughal clemency. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the history you've been taught.